Okay.
Okay, good morning, and thank you so much to all of you for joining us this morning for an event that we at the Adult Education Committee at B'nai Yeshurun have been so excited about planning and very much looking forward to for some time. It's really such a distinct honor to have Rabbi Dr. Tatz zooming in with us from London this morning to speak about a topic that we're calling happiness in a sad world, which would have great meaning and relevance at any time, but particularly the time that we find ourselves in right now. And with a background as a physician and rabbi and medical ethicist who is world renowned, as well as author and lecturer, Rabbi Dr. Tatz is uniquely poised to share wisdom with us and to enlighten us all. Just anecdotally, I want to share that I personally have been very inspired by Rabbi Dr. Tatz for decades now. The first book that I read of his was Living Inspired many years ago. And just recently, in the last year, when our Rabbi Emeritus, Rabbi Pruzansky, was preparing for his Aliyah, he sent an email to the congregation offering to distribute some of his books that had inspired his sermons over the years. And so my teenage son went by to visit and see what treasures he could collect. And among those books that Rabbi Pruzansky gifted him was your book on the Thinking Jewish Teenager's Guide to Life. So when I saw that, that was very heartwarming on a personal level, because literally midor lador, I see my son now has the opportunity to be inspired by you as I was when I was not much older than him. So really, it is such an honor to have you here today. And we're all very much looking forward to learning with you and from you about how to find inspiration from Torah wisdom and patterns that could illuminate our daily lives. So good morning and welcome, and thank you.
Okay, good morning. Thank you, Aviva, for that introduction. Thanks to your community for this opportunity to study and at least to learn how to speak English correctly. I see very few people on my screen, so could you just give me a wave, those I can see, just to tell me that you can hear me? Okay, and if you are not showing me your face on the screen, can you just type me a little greeting so I know that I'm not speaking to myself? Just give me a quick hi or something in the chat box. I'd appreciate that. Okay, great. Greetings to Moskovitz family. Moskovitz, whoa, that's a privilege to have you with us, and greetings to any other friends of mine in Teaneck. Okay, let me ask you to mute yourself if you don't mind, just to give me a chance to present an overview of the subject. Please feel free to type a question in the chat box, and I'll also leave time for you to ask any questions. If I'm able to answer, I'm very happy to do so. You can just unmute yourself and ask with the greatest of pleasure. So let me try to present to you a thought-provoking view of the question of happiness in a difficult world. This is a very serious question. I'm not sure you'll walk out of this talk happy, but at least you'll probably walk away knowing why you're miserable, and at least have some direction to happiness. So let's put our minds into this. I know Sunday morning is probably not.
Press unmute or mute.
No, press mute, please. Thank you. I know Sunday morning is not. Sunday morning is not the greatest time for intellectual effort, but I'm sure Teaneck Jews are United States intellectual black belts, and so I'm sure you'll stay with me on this voyage. Let's think about this deeply as we can. Happiness in a sad world. Let's ask a few questions about happiness and see where that takes us. First of all, I think the place to begin is to ask whether happiness is a mitzvah. Is it a mitzvah? Is it a mitzvah to be happy? And the answer is paradoxical. There's no formalized commandment to be happy. Let me ask the Laufer family to mute themselves. Thank you very much. Okay. There's no formal mitzvah to be happy. Thou shalt be happy. On the other hand, amazingly, there are very clear Torah indications of an obligation to be happy. For example, we say, Ivdus Hashem b'simcha, serve God with joy, which means there's some sort of obligation to be happy. And many other Torah clues. We even have a Jewish folk saying, mitzvah liyos b'simcha, mitzvah gedol liyos b'simcha tamid. It's a great mitzvah to be happy always. That incidentally presents a major problem. How can you be happy always? I mean, what kind of exaggeration is that? Life is full of tragedy. How can you be happy always? Do we mean that seriously? I'd like to try to show you that I think we do. But the first point we note here is that there's no formal commandment to be happy, and yet there's an obligation. And I think that leaves room for very deep thought. What is the sense of a Jewish obligation that's not yet a commandment? What sort of place does that occupy? Okay, as we go through this discussion, I hope we'll discover an answer to that question. If you compare our view, the Jewish view, to the world around us, the secular world we live in, be it American society or the broader Western context, I think they do think that happiness is a goal. I think so. It's shrined in constitutions, the right to happiness, the right to the means to be happy. And I don't think that's authentic from a Jewish point of view. I don't think it's a goal of ours to be happy. And yet, it's an obligation. We need to think about that. Next question to ask is, how do you achieve happiness? And let's compare ourselves again to the secular context that we find ourselves in. How does a non-Jewish world, the secular world around us, how do they find happiness in a world fraught with difficulty? I don't mean to upset you or depress you, but let's note clearly that we live in a world fraught with tragedy, let alone the COVID situation, world that's tormenting of society in many ways and causing great divisions among us, as well as uniting us in some unusual ways. But apart from COVID, the world is fraught with difficulty. An unexpected tragedy lurks around the corner always. You can't deny that. How do you achieve happiness in a world so steeped in tragedy and torment and pain and suffering? I think the non-Jewish answer to this question is detachment. Drunkenness, one sort of drunkenness or another, whether it is a chemical, alcohol, or some other chemical, or whether they put themselves into social experiences of detachment. I personally think that the world of entertainment is very largely based on this idea. You put yourself into an artificial environment that detaches you from reality. And in fact, one of the amazing paradoxes of that is that people take that so far, they'll put themselves into situations of terror in order to detach themselves from the real world. You know, a person wants to have a really good time. What do? They go watch a horror movie. I mean, what is, I must admit to you, I haven't seen a movie for maybe 40 years. I haven't been to the theater or to a movie for 30 or 40 years. But unfortunately, I see movies all the time. Why? I travel. It used to be you sat on a plane and there was one screen you had to avoid. Now there's 15 or 16 around you. And I must tell you, each one's worth. I'm talking about the ones that are halakhically permitted to look at. Many of them are absolutely forbidden. But the things that you look at, I mean, it's too terrible. I see the screens around me, people being killed, shredded, immolated, destroyed, cities wiped out, planets exploded, civilizations destroyed, people sitting there eating their pretzels, having a wonderful time. I mean, what is the meaning of that? A young man wants to impress his date. He takes her to a horror movie where she can watch people tormented and shredded and killed. And I mean, what sort of society does that? And I think the answer is that it's a detachment. And even if you're putting yourself into a situation of artificial fear and terror, but detaching from reality must be very therapeutic. I think that must be the idea. And Judaism does not look at life that way. The Jewish process is a process of superconscious awareness, not a process of detachment. So our problem is, if you're required to remain deeply attached to reality, how do you achieve happiness in a world that is so unpredictably full of tragedy? How do you do that? Let's think about this for a minute. You tell me, well, you know what you'll do? You'll forget about all the suffering in the world. You'll go and have some meal with some friends, and you'll have something to drink and eat and talk and enjoy yourself, and just forget about all the suffering. How insensitive is that? No, you'll tell me, you know what, that's insensitive. You'll go and have a meal with your friends and chat and talk and have a good time while remembering all the suffering around you. That's even worse. But how do you do this? Let me ask you a question. You Teaneck Jews, I'll ask you a question. Please raise your hand. If you do not know one person who is suffering unspeakably, medically, psychologically, financially, maritally, is there anyone among you who does not know anyone? Of course, everybody knows something. How do you generate happiness in a world where you're personally connected with such unspeakable suffering? How do you do that? And if it's a mitzvah to be happy always, how do you begin to approach such an obligation? Let's take this a bit further. There is a statement in the letters of the Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish was one of the great, maybe the greatest of his day, rabbinic leaders. He died in 1954, lived in Bnei Brak. Leader of the Jewish that Torah generation. In one of his letters, look it up, you'll find it very instructive. I think it's 62 or 63 in his collected writings. There's a letter that he writes to someone who must have asked him some personal problem. Somebody obviously wrote to the rabbi with some personal sufferings. And in his answer, he makes a statement that is literally impossible to understand. Here's what he says. I'll give you the words. He says, you know, his language is very rich. But let me translate it loosely into English. For somebody who knows what life's all about, ein etzev ba'olam. There's no sadness in the world. And how can a man say that? You know, our rabbis are not given to vague emotional exaggerations, you know, inaccuracies. When a great rabbi says something, every word is weighed. What do you mean there's no sadness in the world? How can a person say that? What, he forgot about the mitzvah of mourning when somebody dies? He lived through the Second World War, you know, the destruction of European Jewry. He was childless all his life. He had the weight of Jewish people suffering on his shoulders. How can a person say there's no sadness in the world? I mean, what are you saying? You know, there's a mitzvah of mourning when somebody dies. It's debatable halachically if you have to cry. Maybe you don't have to cry. But you have to sit on the floor with your clothes torn, shoeless, in an agony of mourning for somebody who's passed away. And it's a duty. It's a halachic duty. What do you mean there's no sadness in the world? How can a person say that? So we are faced with a very difficult question. How do you raise children? How do you raise children in a world fraught with unbelievable, unexpected, tragic? Every child by a very young age will have somebody in his immediate environment who suffered some unspeakable, inexplicable tragedy in his family. It happens all the time. How do you raise children with a sense of security and happiness and genuine joy in a world that is so full of pain? Okay, let's try to approach this question and think our way through it. I presume you agree with me that we're faced with a serious challenge. Yes, no? Anyone out there? Anyone out there? David, can you hear me? Yes? Okay. This is a serious challenge. And let's see if we can think our way through this. And I hope what you'll get out of this is a sensible, authentic approach from a Jewish perspective to genuine joy. Not only in a world of sadness, but because of it. So stay with me and let's see if we can do that work. I would like to suggest to you a much more authentic definition of happiness than frivolous detachment and drunkenness and taking leave of reality. Let me give you the definition, and let's think it through carefully and see if we can flesh it out and begin to feel its application. Here's the definition of joy, a spiritual definition of joy. It's the experience of the soul to doing what it needs to be doing. When you are moving along a correct road to a correct destination, pushing against resistance and making progress, you will feel joy. Now, this joy may not be reflected on the face. The face may reflect pain and suffering, even agony, but deep within will be an experience of real joy. Let me say it again. When you're moving against resistance to a correct destination, you know it's a correct destination and you feel you're making progress. No matter how much the pain of moving towards that destination, you will feel an inner joy. This has nothing to do with the expression on the face and frivolous detachments and frivolities. I'm talking about the deep spiritual experience of transcendent joy that can be felt in life's greatest and most painful moments. Now, I don't see many convinced faces on my screen. So let me try to prove it to you. Let me try to illustrate this and see how far we can get. Imagine you have to build something that's very important. Imagine you have to work in the hot sun and move heavy logs and rocks and build something very, very important. And this thing is exertion, tremendous exertion, and you have a time limit. But this thing that you're constructing, major consequences depend on its construction, and it's of major significance and major importance. And you labor and you sweat and you strain. How do you feel after hours of work when you see that if you progress at this rate, you will finish on time? There's no question that a surge of pleasure floods through you. The onlooker would not believe it, because the onlooker will see a face strained with sweat and tremors of exertion. But when you're moving towards a destination and you're constructing something that needs to be constructed and it's taking shape and you feel it, you feel joy. There's no question about that. As you build what must be built, the building itself is joyful. I'm not talking about the end result. I'm talking about the work that gets you there. Now, be that I don't see too many happy faces, including Harry and whoever else I can see on my screen, Jane and Sophia and Jacob. Let me try another illustration. Martin, you look happy? Okay, good. Let me try to give you another illustration, if I may. Imagine you are a Martian. You're a Martian. You're an alien. Okay, you come down to this planet Earth and you want to know what humanity is all about. So you hire an Earthling to take you around human society. The first place he takes you is to an institution called LA Fitness. I'm sure you have them where you live in Teaneck. Okay, LA Fitness. You put your eye to the keyhole and you see a young fellow on a machine. He's pulling springs and he's picking up weights and he's exerting himself. He looks terrible. He's ashen. He's pouring with sweat. He's in early kidney failure. you, just out of your range of vision is another Earth being standing there with a submachine gun, torturing him into this form of torture. But if you enter that establishment, you'll find that there's no one forcing him. He's paying for this experience and he's loving every moment. Now, let's just think about that for a moment. He's loving, and you know what he's loving? You know what the real pleasure comes from? The pain itself. And the pain of that sort of exercise and that sort of exertion can be so ecstatic, it can become addictive. Now, let's think about this for a moment. Here's a human being putting himself voluntarily through some sort of torture, and it's delicious. Why? Where is the source of the pleasure in the pain? The answer is because when you're moving towards something you want to achieve, when you're building an achievement and you're moving towards it, and you know you're moving towards that goal, the movement is pleasurable. I'm not talking about the goal. The movement as you progress is intensely pleasurable. It's the sense of moving towards destination. Of course, when you look at this in the broad sense, it takes what we call faith. It takes emunah. If you don't believe your life moves towards an endpoint and a meaningful destination, nothing could be more tragic. You might as well jump off a building. But if you have a modicum of faith, you know that this life, you know, the Chavetz Chaim, one of the great sages of the previous generation, died in 1933. The Chavetz Chaim put it like this. Listen to this beautiful metaphor. The Chavetz Chaim said, imagine a person who is shipwrecked. A man is shipwrecked. And he's almost torn apart in the raging seas. And finally, miraculously, he crawls up exhausted on a beach, naked and dripping and exhausted. And as he begins to recover his breath on the beach, he sees suddenly a group of people walking down the beach to meet him. And they pick him up, they dress him in royal robes, they bow down to him, they take him to a palace, they put him on a throne, and for as far as he can see, he rules the island, and these people do his bidding, and it's an amazing existence. This goes on month after month, and eventually, after some months, he thinks to himself, this has to mean something. This is too strange. So he calls in one of his trusted advisors and he takes him into his private room and he says to him, tell me what's going on here. And the advisor says, Your Majesty, it's just as well that you asked. Every year the same thing happens. Someone's washed up on our beach and we make him king. He says, what happens at the end of the year? The advisor says, we all march into his room with long faces. We march him down to the beach. We take off his clothes. We put him in a little boat. We push him off. We wait for the next one. He says, what should I do? The advisor says, if I were you, I'd start exporting. Start sending everything of value to the mainland now. When that sad day comes and we push you off in that little boat, you'll start rowing. You'll be going to the mainland where you have everything, and your heart will be singing within you. And that's what he does, the king. He starts exporting everything that he can. And sure enough, at the end of the year, with long faces, they walk into his room, in great signs of mourning. They take him down to the beach. They strip him down. They put him in a boat to push him out to sea. And his heart is singing. He's rowing to where he has everything. Says the Chavetz Chaim, that's you. You washed up on this place, a naked little dripping, gasping baby. And awe over you and swaddle you and cuddle you, and you become an agent is going to take his trusted advisor of his intellect into the private place of his mind and ask him what's going on here. And your intellect will tell you it doesn't last forever. There are not too many people walking around who've been here for 150 years. It doesn't go on forever. What happens at the end? With long faces, they're going to march you down and strip you down and put you in a little wooden whatever and push you off. What's the strategy? Start exporting. Export now things that you can export to that world that you'll be traveling to. And then this existence becomes an ecstasy because it's anticipation of an eternity. Of course, you have to have some faith for that, right? But if you don't do that, as every day goes, and believe me, the older you get, the faster they go, right? Life becomes an unmitigated tragedy. But once you move in a direction, okay, are we together so far, ladies, gentlemen? Yes? Okay, let's take the next step. Let's take the next step in our analysis. You know what I'm trying to do here is not prove something to you, but get you to experience it. The Kabbalists say, emes eid la'atzmai. The truth is a witness to itself. If I do my job well this morning, you should not end up learning something, you should end up recognizing something. You say, I know that, I always knew that. let's try to do that together. Let's take the next step. Let's analyze deeply. Why do you enjoy the journey? Why do you enjoy the struggling against resistance as you move towards a destination? And paradoxically and amazingly, the journey itself, the progress itself is pleasurable. Stay with me carefully, please. There's subtle things here. Martin, are you with me? I hope so. Stay with me. Yes, okay, stay with me. Here's the subtlety. If you analyze it deeply, you will realize that as you move towards a destination and you enjoy the journey, all the pleasure of the journey is derived from anticipation of the destination. The reason you enjoy the journey is because of the delicious anticipation of the destination. And by the way, many times in life, the anticipation is better than the destination. Many times in life, it pays not to arrive. It's just a big disappointment. Now, the anticipation of the destination is what is where you derive the pleasure. Let me prove that to you. Let me prove it to you. Imagine you're building this construction in the sun, you're moving these logs and rocks, and you're enjoying it as a delicious experience as you feel it taking shape. You suddenly become informed that one moment before it's completed, it's going to be utterly destroyed. What happens to the sense of achievement and pleasure? Pure torture. Not enjoying the work. You're enjoying the fact that every step of work here and every moment of work and exertion is building something transcendent, is building a result. You're on this train. You're going to this longed-for destination that you've waited who knows how long for, and every mile brings you closer. And it's a difficult and hot and torturous and arduous journey, but it's delicious as you dream of stepping off into the arms of the destination that you've been longing to get to. And every mile brings you closer, and it's a delicious experience as you anticipate that climax of arriving. And suddenly you realize you're on the wrong train. What happens to the pleasure? Pure torture. You're not enjoying the pain. You're enjoying the fact that the pain is anticipation of destination. Every obstacle conquered and every mile journeyed and every foot put forward in that journey is pleasurable because it anticipates a destination. That's where the pleasure is. Now let's go one step further. I think you'll see the paradox. What's the pleasure of the destination? When you get to that mountaintop and you finally arrive at that destination, you know where the pleasure is? You know in which the pleasure inheres of that destination? You know what drives the pleasure of the destination? How hard the journey was that got you there. And the more difficult the journey was, the greater the pleasure of the destination. When you stand on that mountaintop, you're not enjoying the view. If they put you there by helicopter, it wouldn't be the same thing at all. It's what you conquered and what you achieved and what you risked to get there. The Talmud says you'd rather have one thing you did yourself than 9 that you did for pleasure, and that 9 that you're given for free. Daniel, I see you agree with me. I'm glad. Here's the paradox. Stay with me. We are built in such a way that we enjoy progress towards a destination and with anticipation of destination. And paradoxically, when we get to the destination, the pleasure is derived from how much work we did to get there. Where's the circle? Where's the beginning or the end of the circle? Again, this is a weird phenomenon. I'm talking about universal human experience here. This is not Jewish. Later, we'll get to some Jewish stuff. I'm talking about the way the human being is constructed. And we are constructed for pleasure, by the way. The Ramchal says in his classic work, Mesilas Yesharim, that God created you for ecstasy. That's what he created you for. And he doesn't only mean ecstasy in another world. He means ecstasy in this world, achieving another world. So listen to this weird paradox. We struggle towards destination and we richly enjoy the anticipation. And when we get there, the pleasure is of how much work you did in the journey to get yourself there and direct. How much, when you hold something aesthetic that you built, whether it took you an hour or a week or a month or some professional achievement, what you're enjoying isn't simply the beauty of the thing, it's how much of yourself is invested in that. How much? Let's ask a question now. Why are we built that way? And here we come to something Kabbalistic. I don't know if Teaneck is a favorable, fertile ground for Kabbalistic ideas, but I'm going to assume that it is for the moment. Here, let me refer you to a Kabbalistic teaching. According to Kabbalah, everything you ever experience in this world is projected from a higher world. Let me say that again. Every single phenomenon in this world, every object, every moment of time, every human experience, everything in this world is projected from a higher world. The reason you have experiences in this world is to teach you about a higher world. You are not in this world to know this world. You're in this world for a transcendent purpose, to use this world as a projection of something deeper and to get to know that. All of life is like that. Let me give you the simplest of examples. When you see a human being, you're seeing only a physical exterior, but that's not the point of the relationship. The point of the relationship with a human being is to know the inner being, which you never see. You never see the soul, no matter how intimately you know someone. You live with someone for 50 years, you never see them. All you see is the externality. But the point of the external is to project into the depth from where it comes. Anybody who regards human relationships as the flesh only, seeing the external and superficial and physical, is a major travesty of human relationships. That's nothing but prostitution. The point of a human relationship is to use the external face to gather its movements and its expressions and its nuances and gestures to get to know the person. And we do that automatically. That's the point of a human relationship. The point of living in the world is to see its nuances and gestures and movements to get to know the soul that's within it, to become God conscious. That's what you're in the world for. And here's the principle according to Kabbalah. Every single thing in this world is projected from that world to teach you about it. And furthermore, everything in that world, the world that we call the world of Hashem's name, is projected into this world. He wouldn't put it there without projecting it and giving you some access to that world. Which means as a Jew, you're required to take everything you experience in this world and use it as a means of making contact with something deeper. Let me give you a simple example. I'll give you a trivial example, anything. Here's a trivial example. People get homesick. Believe me, ask the South Africans. People get homesick. And the Talmud says that people get homesick for where they come from, no matter where the place is. It can be a very mundane place, and you can be in a very beautiful place. You long for the place you come from. Chen hamakom lo yoshvav is the language of the Talmud. People long for the place they call home. Why? Why do you long for where you come from? So if you ask a modern scientific atheist, they'll say, because a few million years ago when you were a pigeon, you needed to find your way home. But that's garbage. The reason you long for home is because your soul is longing for the place it came from. Your deep reality, your neshama, is longing for its divine point of origin. So it's projected into the world of trivial emotions as longing for home. There's nothing in this world that doesn't teach you about a source. Let me take a more challenging experience. In Hasidus, in the Hasidic sources, they talk about dveikus. Dveikus means the obligation to bond with God in a way that you disappear entirely, a complete dissolution of ego, so that you bond with God and lose yourself entirely. And paradoxically, in that act, you discover more objectively who you are. What is that projected as in this world? It's supposed to be marriage. You know what marriage is supposed to be? Two people giving themselves to each other so intensely and so fearlessly and so vulnerably that they lose themselves entirely in this construction of something that is larger than the sum of the parts. And what do you do when you get into that complete loss of self in this construction? You paradoxically discover more about who you genuinely are. And what do you do with that new found sense of self? You put it right back in. Your marriage is supposed to be a nuclear reaction. By the way, if you're a man, this is hopeless. You might as well forget it. I mean, for men, this is a hopeless exercise. For a man to get beyond his ego is basically impossible. But women tend to understand this thing naturally. Ask any woman, she'll explain it to you. But be that as it may, in the intimacy of marriage, says the Ramban, you learn about godliness. When two people bond into one, in an ecstasy, you learn about what it is to bond with God. But the principle I'm trying to bring out here is, everything in the higher world is projected into this world, and everything you experience in this world is coming from a higher world. That's the rule. Okay, now, with that in mind, let's ask this question. Stay with me carefully, please. When we experience something in life, we move towards a destination and we enjoy the effort and the conquest of the obstacles. And it's a delicious experience of anticipation of destination. And when we get to the destination, we enjoy it in proportion to how difficult the journey was. What is that teaching you about the higher world? From where is that being projected? And here's the answer. Life itself. Life itself. Our view of life is that it's an arduous, difficult, torturous journey towards a destination that is nothing other than the work that was invested here. Let's get this clear. There's nothing more important than this, by the way. Nothing more important than this. Life, in our view, is a journey towards a destination in which the destination is nothing other than what the journey generated. You know, I will put it to you in the words of the Zohar. All these clumsy words that I'm attempting to share with you, the Zohar puts in 4 words. 4 words. The Zohar says, in the world to come, when you die and leave this world, in the world to come, tam ha'etz katam ha'pri. The taste of the tree is the taste of the fruit. That's all it says. What does that statement mean? It means in this world, a tree is a long, woody, tasteless process. It takes years and years and years, and eventually you get a delicious fruit. In the next world, you can walk up to the tree and eat the fruit, or you can eat the tree. Then you realize that the tree is the fruit. The fruit in the next world is the effort you put in here. It's not another place. And you think the next world is another place where you go, Baruch Hashem, this one is over, and then you get to have the good times and the fun fair and the candies. That's not our vision of the next world. There are religions that believe that, by the way, you know that. Our vision of the next world is nothing other than living again what you lived here with the ecstasy of the feeling that you constructed it. That's our concept. And therefore, let me say it as clearly as I can. When you spend an hour building something, or a week building something, or a month building some professional project, and you get addicted to it, and you forget to eat and sleep, and the work is delicious and addictive, and when you finally get there, your pride and joy is how much you've invested to get to that destination. You're feeling a microcosmic experience of life itself. And that's the ecstasy you should feel in every life difficulty. When you push against resistance and you make progress and you conquer a life difficulty and you develop and you progress and you become a bigger person and your marriage becomes a bigger marriage and your family becomes more real and more deep, you're feeling an investment in eternity. You're feeling an anticipation of a destination that you can feel coming. And when you get there, the ecstasy will be nothing other than the work you invested here. And it should be ideally a cycle of pleasure. Now, you need to be a big person for this. Of course. Let's take it one step further, if I may. Let's take it one step further. You know, let's try something together. Let's reach for the peak. Let me try to share with you an experience at the peak of human greatness. And again, this is beyond our level. It's beyond a normal person's level, but just to see what we're looking at. Just to see where we're heading. When the Chazon Ish said, let's look at some of the questions we mentioned before. Ivdus Hashem b'simcha, serve God with joy. It doesn't say, don't worry, be happy. It says, serve God with joy. If you serve, the joy will be there. If you're working and building, you'll feel the joy. I'll give you another example. Listen to this. The Torah gives us 98, 99 Holocaust-type curses that are promised to befall the Jewish people when we defect from our divine responsibility. Right? The Torah gives us 98 or 99 horrific, unspeakable curses that we have experienced throughout history. God is promising us that we will go through those sorts of torment. At the end of the 99 curses, the Torah gives you a reason. Listen to this unbelievable statement. You know why you will suffer thus in history, says God? Because you do not serve God with joy. Are you serious? God is going to punish us with those torments because we weren't happy enough? That's the problem? That's not what it says. Because you didn't serve God with joy. Had you served the joy would have been there. I didn't command you to be happy. I commanded you to serve. If you build correctly, the joy will be there. You know, let me give you an example. Again, this is beyond the norm, but at least to know what we're looking at. What is the mitzvah of mourning when someone dies, someone dies in a family? What's the mitzvah of mourning? You know what the mitzvah is of mourning? It's to carry that person on a journey that they can no longer carry themselves. That's the mitzvah. You know that? You know, if you ask people, why is the Jewish practice of mourning, sitting for 7 days and all those details, why do we do that? People tell you, well, it's healthy psychologically and you come to terms and you take leave. That's all fringe benefits. Do you know what the essence of the mitzvah is? It's to bear a person on a journey, particularly a relative of yours who carried you like a parent, and they can no longer carry themselves. You act in empathy with the soul. They cannot journey, you sit. They cannot progress, you have no shoes. They cannot appear in the world, your appearance is torn. Right? You are acting in empathy. The Rambam says categorically that if you fail to mourn for someone in your family that you have an obligation to mourn for, you're guilty of cruelty. That's the language you use, achzariot, cruelty. You could have helped them and you did not help them. The work. It's carrying a soul on a journey. Now imagine a person understands that and they spend the day in an agony of mourning for somebody who's died. And that night they collapse in bed exhausted with their wrenching emotions. You know what they should feel? Through all that pain? Joy. I did what I had to do today. Of course, it's beyond the mere mortal, but that's the idea. Within the pain, you can feel the satisfaction of knowing that you did what you had to do today. You know, by the way, if you look at the greats of Judaism, again, way beyond mortal standards, but again, the target, you'll see this constantly. I'll give you an example. Look at the prophets. Again, this is beyond belief, but you need to know this. Take the prophets, take Jeremiah. Jeremiah wrote the book of Jeremiah, which is a book of unmitigated tragedy. He wrote the book of Eicha, Lamentations, which is unspeakable torment and tortures. Let me tell you something amazing. When he wrote, of course, you know those books were predictions. They weren't descriptions after the fact. When Jeremiah wrote Eicha, he was warning what would be. But in those unspeakable tragedies that he predicted, while he was writing that book, he was experiencing joy. You know how we know? because our commentaries point out that a man cannot receive a prophetic inclination, he cannot receive a prophetic connection unless he's serene and in joy. Unbelievable thing. This means a person writing those words is joyful, is a connection. It's unbelievable. You know, you have Jonah. Jonah's on a ship. The ship's about to break up. There's an unreal storm. The sailors are panicking. They're going crazy. They're about to die. He's asleep in the bottom of the ship. He's asleep. They wake him up. There's a storm going on. Yeah, I'm not worried about storms. I'm a Jew. We cross the ocean. The ocean's no problem. He's asleep. Next time you're 35,000 feet above the Atlantic, Martin, and the plane starts shaking very badly, try taking a little nap. Yeah, take a little nap. You don't take a nap. You start doing tshuva. You say Shema. He's asleep because a prophet is living with God. He's a baby in his mother's arms. She can be walking to a gas chamber. It makes no difference to him. A person who's living at that level, I've had the privilege of being connected to some of the great rabbis of the previous generation. I was taught by Rav Simcha Wasserman, the son of Elchanan Wasserman. My great teacher was Moshe Shapiro. You look at the faces of these people. Let me tell you something. In the Jewish world, and I'm sure it's true in Teaneck, in our educational institutions and our homes, we put up photographs of great rabbis. Since the early days of photography, old black and white photographs. Why do we do that? The unthinking Jew will tell you, well, you've got to put up something to idolize and emulate and idolize. We can't put the sports stars and the movie stars on the walls. They're not wearing enough clothing, So we put rabbis, I've got news for you. It's not idolization. It's education. There's a reason the Jewish people do that. Because in every one of those faces, you can see unbelievable deep awareness of the world's reality and suffering and not a line of pain or frustration. And if you get to know those people, there's a photograph of the Ponevezher, a close-up of his face after the Germans killed his wife and 10 children. It's unbelievable serenity. Unbelievable serenity. You ponder those faces. I have here a picture of here's a photograph of the Alter of Slobodka. Look at that face. My own teacher, Moshe Shapiro. Where's my photograph? You're talking about a person, visibly, you can see, living in another world, where, how did it, Rav Wasserman, who taught us, was, the Germans killed his father, Rav Chanan, they wiped out his family. He was the only one who survived besides another brother. He was childless. He lived through he and his Rebbetzin, they lived through unedited tragedy. And he sparkled with joy always. He scintillated with joy. It was an unbelievable thing. So once my brother-in-law, who was his physician, gathered the courage to ask him a personal question. Listen to this. Here's a life message that's unforgettable. Once my brother-in-law, was very approachable and he was very close. We were both close to him. And he felt he was close enough to ask him an intimate question. So on one occasion, he said to the rabbi, he said, Rav Wasserman, how do you manage such joy always? Let's face it, you've been through unspeakable tragedy, more than most people could bear. And you always full of joy. How do you manage that? Listen to what the rabbi said. He said, every situation I find myself in, I ask what can be done. Whatever can be done, I do. Whatever cannot be done, I do not worry about. You know what we do? We don't do what should be done, and we worry. That's why we look the way we do. But a person of spiritual greatness asks himself what can be done. And what can be done, you do. The rest is not your problem. It's his problem. Of course you feel it. Of course you feel it, but it's not your problem. Aviva, I don't know if you permit me a personal statement, if I may. Give me permission to tell you something personal. If I may, once we're at this point already. I've chosen to spend my life in a losing field. Completely losing field. I chose to spend my life in Jewish outreach. I started off in medicine, and although it may be hard to believe, I had academic promise. I know it's a little hard to believe, but I probably could have achieved something in the field of medicine. And I left it for Jewish outreach, which is a total loser's game. Just to give you a general calculation, they reckon that in the past 40 years or so, about 40 or 50,000 Americans have been brought in to religious Judaism and observance through Jewish outreach work. And during that time, more than 1 million have been lost. More than 1 million, okay? You're talking about Jewish numbers going down precipitously. You're not even holding even. You're talking about a completely losing game. I would have liked to spend my life in something that I felt like we were making progress, we were winning. How do you handle a situation like that? And the answer is, what's your job? What's your job? If I think I'm here to win the war, I might as well lay down and die, because we're being shot to pieces, and largely by our own people, by the way, in case you hadn't noticed. But if my job is to be a medic on the battlefield and take one more wounded soldier and stop his bleeding, if that's what my job is, I do my job and I relish my job. The fact that there's a war going on is his problem. He knows what he's doing. There's a general in charge. That's the attitude. The attitude is, if you carve out your work carefully and you do it, and you know exactly what you have to, you feel the thrill of achieving what you have. That's the work you've been given. He put you in this generation as a man or a woman. I know that's confused as well these days. But if you understand who you are and what your task is, and you move towards your task, you will feel the thrill of what you're doing. The fact that there's tragedy going on around you, of course you feel. But if you're a big enough person, it should not affect your happiness. Let's talk briefly about depression, if I may. Depression, it's a big problem in our generation. Maybe not in Teaneck. I'm sure in Teaneck everybody's full of joy. Depression, a big problem. You know what the causes of depression? I'm not talking about genetic and chemical problems. I'm talking about life depression. Like most men, when they hit 35, they start getting depressed. I'm talking about life depression. Listen carefully. The cause of joy, the real cause of joy in life, is moving towards a meaningful destination. The cause of depression is when your life is not moving towards a destination. When the days and weeks and months are going by and the wheels are spinning and no progress is being made, you will feel depressed. Listen to this. The genuine source of happiness is life progressing. When life is not progressing, you feel the cold hand of death, and that's called depression. And people who've been there will tell you it's the most difficult pain imaginable. And that's correct. When the wheels are spinning and life is going by and another day goes by, and you'll never get that day back again, and no progress is being made, you will feel depressed. What's the cure for depression? What's the cure for depression? Get moving. You cannot be depressed when you're productive. You can be weeping in pain, but you cannot be depressed. Depression is that black end of the road, hopeless, no place to go. The Chazon Ish did never say there's no pain in the world. Ein etzev ba'olam, said the Rabbi. There's no cause for depression in the world. Never, no matter what situation you do, no matter how limited you are, you've given a job to do in those circumstances. If you're doing the job you were given in your circumstances, and there's no more you can be doing, you have a right to feel the ecstasy of the job well done. How do you get a person moving when they're depressed? You can't walk up to a person and appeal to their inner being. You walk up to the person who's depressed and say, be happy. They will not be happy. They'll be suicidal. Take them for a run. Get them doing something with their hands. Best of all, get them doing something for somebody else. You cannot be depressed when you're moving productively. Let me tell you another secret. There are only two escapes from a life that is going nowhere. This is the most important thing to teach your children in a life of tragedy and unpredictability. Only when children understand that they are making progress of their own. By the way, if I may say as an aside, the culture of giving rewards to children may not be so effective always. Give an external reward where the reward is not the feeling of achievement. Not so simple. There's an interesting book on the subject, by the way, for those of you who like to read about these things. There's an interesting book by a man called Alfie Kahn called Punished by Rewards. Punished by Rewards. Very interesting book. He brings a lot of scientific evidence to show that when you reward people, incentives, you give them bonuses and money and candies and whatever is appropriate for their age. Often not as effective, sometimes demeaning, and often not as effective as the reward of the job itself. And there's nothing wrong with rewards and incentives. Believe me, the Rambam says it's permissible to give children candy, and after that to give them nice clothing, and after that to give them respect. Yes, they means to an end, but they need a little sophistication in that. There are only two escapes from a life that is going nowhere. Listen to this. A life that is making no progress towards meaningful destination, there are only two escapes. One is depression, and the other one is worse. Worse. Depression is not as bad because you may one day discover that there's a meaning to life and get out of your depression when you start working. The other one is almost hopeless. And that's a person who invests himself in achievement that is ridiculous, meaningless, and trivial. But he's so invested in it that he feels joy. Here's a person who he decides he has to have the world's greatest beer can collection or modern art collection. Listen, if you're collecting modern art as an investment, that's fine. But modern art as an ideal? What is modern art? The fellow throws a can of paint over his shoulder, gets his dog to walk around on the canvas, and then he sells it to the Metropolitan Museum for $1 million with a label saying angst. Listen, I'm not a fan of modern art, okay? I wouldn't be stubborn about that. But the point I'm making is, a massive collection of modern art or beer cans is not what life's all about, but it's good enough to give you the thrill that keeps you going. People who get addicted to that, to building muscle or money or political power or a collection of comic books or beer cans is enough to keep an ecstasy flowing. Those people get addicted to it and they think of nothing else. And that's a tragedy because nothing is being built and that person will never discover it. And by the way, if I may say so, here's where Jews are different than non-Jews. When a Jewish boy builds a beer can collection, it has to be the best in the world. Then he starts a fan club and a website and he takes it seriously. Because Jews know that life is serious. And when Jews get invested in scientific achievement or building muscle or politics or power or money, they take it seriously. It's a life commitment. And that's a tragedy. Again, don't misunderstand me. There's no problem building political power or money when it's for a purpose. But when you're doing it because that's your life's goal, and when you die, that disappears, what an unmitigated tragedy. Okay, so I hope we've made some progress together. We've talked about happiness. We've talked about depression. I hope this has been useful to you. The concept here is that joy is not detachment. It's not frivolous drunkenness. Those are necessary, by the way. It's necessary to detach. Shabbos can be a very good break. Vacations are necessary. It's healthy and therapeutic to take a break, even in the world of some kind of kosher entertainment. It could be. It's authentic and it's fine. But it all has to be a refreshing of the energies to get back into the work, which should be more pleasurable than the vacations. Right? A person who lives his life, you ask a person, what are you here for? What are you in the world for? And when he analyzes, he discovers that he's in the world to work, to keep working, to keep surviving, to keep going to work, to keep surviving. What for? Well, for a few days at the end of the year where he collapses unconscious on a beach someplace so he can do it again. What a tragedy. And if you scratch beneath the surface, you know what he'll tell you? You say, eventually I'll have enough that I'll be able to, believe me, by then your arthritis will be so bad, you won't be able to chase what you thought you'd be chasing. That's a travesty of human existence. You're not here for that. You're here for every day's meaningful achievement and every life ordeal conquered and every relationship built. And there should be a crescendo of construction where the parts become much more. The sum becomes much more than the sum of the parts. The total is much more than the sum of the parts. If a marriage is not moving towards something that is deeper and more meaningful than simply a string of events and kindnesses, it's a failure. If your mind, your Torah wisdom, your life wisdom is not moving towards something that is larger than the sum of the parts, if you're not a bigger person than you were previously, you're missing the point. And that is genuine happiness. Nothing to do with the expression on the face. And when we say mitzvah gedol liyas b'simcha tamid, it's a great mitzvah to be happy always, we mean that, even in the pain. Let me leave you with a thought and I'll stop in case you have any questions. So I may have failed in my goal here of having you walk out of this talk smiling, but I hope I've given you cause for a deeper appreciation of a Jewish view of life. And that is that we do in fact have a goal. It's not a mitzvah to be happy. It's a mitzvah to do mitzvahs and to serve. But there's no greater joy than constructing and doing what is ultimately meaningful. Let me leave you with a thought. I'll leave you with a thought, if I may. You know, the happiest moment of all is where journey meets destination. You know, the journey is pleasurable because you anticipate destination. The destination is pleasurable because you recap how much work you put in. But there's one moment of perfection, and that's where journey meets destination, because the journey has pain as well. And destination has also a feeling of boredom once the ecstasy has been felt. There's one perfect moment when you step off into the arms of the destination, the moment of arrival. That moment, what the Kabbalists call when the sower and the reaper meet. Shabbos. As the week's work reaches a climax and the sun goes down and you unburden your burden. There's a moment of tremendous release. There's a movement, there's a moment of moving into destination, into Tachlis. And as you move into that zone, the work of that zone is simply to be. The week is for becoming and Shabbos is simply for being. The ecstasy of Shabbos is living in a zone where there's nothing else left to do, simply enjoying what has been built. And the arrival of that moment is a perfect moment. And by the way, you know, it's interesting as an aside. You know, when people reach that moment of climax, when people reach that moment where their work gives way to the result, you know what they do at moments like that? They begin weeping. Weeping. You know why? Because the feeling of two zones meets. Here's a person to be longing to see someone separated by some political ridiculous situation for who knows how many decades. And finally, the train pulls into the station and they run into each other's arms. You know what they do? They start howling. What are you crying for? Now's the time for joy. You know what the Gemara says? When the Mashiach arrives, Jewish families will sit and begin crying. Jewish families will sit down and begin crying when the Mashiach arrives. You know why? Because as we go through history, God gives us a heart of stone. He can't afford to let us feel reality because you'd be paralyzed. If you knew what one child went through 80 years ago, tortured to death by the Germans, one child, one family, you'd never sleep again. So you feel it badly, and the next day, not so bad, and the day after that, you're back to having a party. Because you have a heart of stone. But when the Mashiach arrives, it says, I will take away from you the heart of stone. And I'll give you a heart of flesh. And that's when the crying will begin. It's when you move into that zone, beyond the point of the combination of those two emotions. And then you move into a zone where there's nothing to do but be. Let me finish with this, if I may. Sherry's asking about Menuchas HaNefesh. Menuchas HaNefesh is the ground on which the joy is built. When you move into that situation, Menuchas HaNefesh is the result. When you're living through a life joyful like this, you have total Menuchas HaNefesh all the time. You're not straining for something. In straining for the next step, you're enjoying the one. I wrote a book with a Buddhist Jew. It's called Letters to a Buddhist Jew, which goes into that detail. Sherry, you can look up that book. And if you want to understand it deeply, buy 2 copies. Anyway, let me finish with this. There's one thing in human experience that represents this. The mitzvah is called Shabbos, where you enter a zone of simply being. And that's the pleasure of Shabbos. And in Torah, it's called learning Lishma, learning Torah for its own sake. You know what's unique about learning Torah? That you do it for no purpose other than enjoying the learning. That's why it's so ecstatic. I'm not talking about learning in order to know what to do. That's another. I'm talking about when a person learns Torah for the ecstatic experience of enjoying, learning to think how God thinks. That's called ecstasy. And by the way, Torah and Shabbos are deeply linked because they're both experiences of endpoint enjoyed for themselves. And in universal human experience, not Jewish, this is called playing a game. I promise you I'll finish with this, another 3 minutes. You know what's the idea of playing a game? A game is an activity that all human cultures do, that you do for the pleasure of playing the game. You don't play a game I'm not talking about a game you do to learn a skill or meet people. I'm talking about a game you play for nothing other than a completely meaningless, trivial activity that's done for the sake of the activity. Grown people sit around a table and they go up and down and round and backwards and forwards for 3 hours. Nothing is achieved and it's delicious. You know why? Because nothing is achieved. It's a little bubble of time out of time where you simply enjoy what you're doing. There's another version of this, by the way, and that's talking garbage. Talking absolute nonsense. People talk, and I hate to admit this, men do it much worse than women. Much worse. When women talk nonsense to each other, if you listen carefully, you'll see a lot of useful information being exchanged. Men talk total garbage. They can discuss sports statistics from years and years before. It's completely irrelevant to anything, and it's delicious. You know why it's delicious? Because nothing meaningful is happening. You're in that little zone, a little premonition of the world to come, and you're simply enjoying having arrived. You're enjoying being in that zone where nothing else. And that's what a game is. I'll finish with a story. Here's a story. I have a friend who's a lawyer, as it happens in South Africa. He told me the following story. He said he saw his kids playing Monopoly. You people play that in Teaneck, Monopoly? You know what that is? Playing Monopoly. Friday afternoon, he's getting ready for shul. He sees the kids are playing the same game. All week, they've been playing the same game. So very paternalistically, he walks over and he says, listen, kids, you obviously don't understand how to play Monopoly. You can't play Monopoly for a whole week. The way you play the game is eventually, after playing for a while, someone's bankrupt. They fall out. Then you carry on playing. Someone else is bankrupt. Eventually, somebody has the Monopoly. They win the game. They look at him and they say, no, Abba, you don't understand. The way we play Monopoly is that when one of us falls out, the rest of us get together and we make a gemach. We make a Jewish free loan fund. We send him up in business. We carry on playing. You see, the father thinks that there's got to be a winner. The kids think, but then there's no game. We don't want to win. We want to play. That's Jewish education. Anyway, Aviva, thank you for this opportunity to speak to your community. I'll stop in case anyone has any question related to the subject, but there's a lot more to say, obviously. But that expanded sense of consciousness, which is the progress you're making in life, there's no joy like that. No joy like that. and it can be felt even in the depth of life's pain. Let me stop in case you have a question, and I'm very happy to answer. Either unmute yourself and ask, or type it on my screen, and if I can, I'll be happy to answer.
Hi, this is Mindy Stein. I do have something to say. It says Martin Stein, but it's Mindy and Martin. So I enjoyed it very much. Can you hear me?
I sure can.
Okay, I enjoyed it very much. It's a little bit like Noah. When Noah finished building everything and the world came again, God had to tell him to get out of the ark, sail mud to get out, because he thought it would just happen again and destroyed, and he had to be pushed to go out and achieve and continue. So I feel like that. And also there was a movie where the soldiers built the bridges of something over River Kwai. My husband just told me what it was called, where they were told that they have to build this bridge, and it was for the enemy, and they had great achievement in it. And then when it was destroyed, they felt sad. They were their achievement. So all those things came in a little bit to play in what you were talking about.
Thank you. I gather from your comment that you agree with me. I'm very happy. Thank
Yes,
you.
I agree. I thought it was great. There was so much to take from that. I really enjoyed it. It taught me a lot.
Okay.
I have to tell you, I know somebody that was very depressed, and what I did is I took them, I said, come with me. You'll help me with the Amuna children, with our children, to raise money and help other people come to the old age homes, etc. It didn't work, but I tried.
Well, Mindy, try again, and you should have given this talk. But anyway, thank you for that.
I should have given this talk, but okay.
Okay, so thank you very much again, and greetings to the Moscovich family. Nice to have you with us. Thank you. Yeah, Terry, you want to say something? No? Okay, so thank you for this opportunity, and it's been a pleasure speaking to you. And feel free to email me if you have any comments or questions. I'm happy to answer if I can. I'm sure Aviva will give you the email address. But all the best. I wish you a healthy winter, and everyone should remain healthy and COVID-free and happy.
Can you give us your email address?
Thank you.
Sure. My email address is suzannetatz@gmail.com. SUZANNETATZ@gmail.com. But otherwise, ask Aviva for it. And I'm very happy to, or go to akivatatz.com, which is a website, and you can reach me through that with the greatest of pleasure. Martin, thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi Tatz.
This was wonderful.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
It was great.
Thank you to everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Thank
Aviva.
you.
Thank you, Aviva. Regards to your family.
They're on, Mindy. You can tell them yourself.
Hi there. I'm sorry, I'm not ready to go on.
That's okay. They're waving to you.
There, I see you, Barry. It's so nice. You brought up such wonderful children. Okay, not personal.
Hi, Viva. Great work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aviva.
Thanks for being here.
Hey, Lenny.
As usual, just great.
What?
Was this recorded?
Yes.
Can you tell me how to access it?
Yessie, can you share how to access the recording?
Who's asking? I'll let you know as soon as I find out how to access it.
Oh, Lydia. My name is Lydia Isak. Hi.
Lydia Isak. Okay.
We're kind of new to the neighborhood. We moved right before COVID. So all my shiurim that I've been going to in the neighborhood have been via Zoom. And I really wanted to share this with my husband. So I wanted to know how you recorded it, how I could access it.
I'll have to find out how to access it.
Thank you. Can I
what-
give
how
you
do-
my email and you could let me know? Is that possible?
Yes, please.
Okay, it's